Hey guys and girls, we hope you're doing well. Board now with Rachel McDonald. Now, in a weird sort of Stranger Thing-esque type scenario, we're actually recording this review after we've recorded the review for episode 4. Go figure. I'll explain. What happened is we started doing well. We did actually do the recording, the review for episode 3, and it turns out the damn thing didn't come out, and we're both really frustrated because it was a really good review. We had a really good discussion. We had a little bit of a set to on a certain, scene, and a disagreement there. So again, that's not the sort of thing you can replicate here. So we're just going to go over what we thought. General episode 5. It's called The Flea and the Acrobat, which again it relates to Mr. Clark, the science teacher, where he's explaining the science of the theory of the upside down world compared with the obviously the world of Stranger Things and Hawkins, and he's explaining the science behind what they would have to do to obviously disrupt that and actually get to the other side. He uses this metaphor involving the flea and the acrobat. And we were saying, weren't we, how the science in the episode was really well done.
Yes, very accessible and explained really well. And how much we love Mr. Clark because he's such a great character. And we love seeing, someone who loves the kids and respects the kids and takes the time to actually speak with them. We just love Mr. Clark. He's awesome. But yes, so we spoke again also about the kids and how smart they are, how they're figuring out the upside down. This is the first episode where we get a reference of the upside down. Mike is using the Dungeons and Dragons board to kind of represent Hawkins. So it's like on the top of the board, this is us, flips the board over, this is the upside down, and this is where Will is stuck. So of course in this episode the kids set up out on their adventure to try and find the gate so that they can find Will. And the kids' journey this episode, we get some really good characterization from them, and we get to see kind of everything come to a bit of a head, because obviously Lucas up until this point has been very anti-Elle, a little bit extreme, but in this episode she is actually deliberately misleading them because she's scared. She doesn't want them to go to the gate because she knows the danger. So she she's messing with the compasses that they're using, and it all comes to a big fight at the end where Lucas is a little extreme. I mean, he keeps calling her a traitor. We're 11 years old here, people. We can calm down, okay? But, the kids end up having a big fight. Everything's kind of brought to the forefront. Very intense scene to watch. Fun scene. Again, we get some really good character stuff. We get to see how Elle's powers are kind of linked to her emotions as she kind of screams at Mike and Lucas to stop fighting, and she ends up throwing Lucas across the ground. Keith mentioned that, for a minute or two you worry that maybe Lucas isn't going to survive. So we get a little bit, of tense there. We think maybe she's actually killed him, but he is obviously only unconscious because we're not killing kids in this series. So definitely the kid stuff is fun.
We didn't mind the Lucas stuff as much this time. We didn't. We felt it was a bit more justified because it set something up for the next episode.
Yes.
So it has more of a purpose, and we could also understand more where he was coming from. We could understand that obviously Elle did do this thing. She then obviously uses her powers, which gets out of hand. Obviously, it's not her intention, but it does, as you said in the last go around, it does show, like her powers, how she struggles to control them at times. And it's a really good scene. It's a really effective, quite powerful scene, and it's one of those where, for such a mainstream show and stuff, it actually surprises you how far they go sometimes with some of this stuff. So it's a good scene, and although you're probably more on the other side of things than you are, again, Lucas settled down a bit, but you do understand it more in this, and the whole thing, the whole tension that's been there since Elle's come into the group to loggerheads. They end up divided at the end of the episode because Elle obviously is upset and goes off on her own. So that's obviously going to play a big factor next time. So
good stuff. So that was Yeah, we enjoyed the kid stuff. You get a little bit of background on Elle. We get to see her in the sensory deprivation tub for the first time, and they're showing how they're using her to spy on the Russians, because it's the 80s, we have to have the Russians, and how she sees the Demogorgon for the first time. So again, we're getting little bits and pieces, and like Keith mentioned, I think one of our reviews, flashbacks are actually used very well in this show. So every time we see Hawkins' lab, we get like more information. So that part was really good. So yeah, we like that. Now, in our first recording, Keith and I had an argument because he is very clearly wrong about how awesome Steve Harrington is. But we were
I
talking
didn't
about the Steve
say
and
it
Nancy
wasn't
stuff.
awesome. Well,
No, sorry, I'm
awesome's
being
a
harsh
bit
here.
strong, but yeah,
It is not. Steve Harrington is
no, it
awesome
is a
and must
bit
be
strong.
protected at all costs. But we did talk a bit about the Nancy and Steve stuff and the scene in the garage. And I spoke about how Steve, once again, is subverting my expectations because, you know, we know he had a fight with Nancy last episode and you just expect him to go off and be a dick. But instead, he comes to Nancy's, he apologizes, he says he's sorry about not caring about Barb. She asks him if he got into trouble with his parents. And he's like, yeah, totally. But, you know, who cares? And for me, that again just subverted my expectations of Steve, showing that he actually does care. And I kind of see the scene as like him trying to connect with Nancy, but it's not that, for me, it's not that she doesn't still want to be with Steve. It's just that she's dealing with something that she can't really talk to him about, you know, because he might either think she's crazy or he might not believe her, or she just might not be comfortable talking to someone who doesn't share the experience. Because obviously she and Jonathan have this shared experience of someone they love being in the Upside Down. So that brings them a bit closer together. And the Nancy and Jonathan scenes obviously are building their dynamic, which Keith and I do read slightly differently. So we got a bit feisty over that too.
So, yeah, so I think the disagreement was more on the reading of the scene and the purpose of, rather than, because most of that I agree with. I agree, as I said last time, then Steve is pretty cool in the scene, and I think he does handle it really well. And I definitely agree with you about it continues the subversion of his character. We just disagree on the purpose and the meaning of the sort of thematics in a way, and obviously we do disagree, as we discovered a little bit about Nancy and Jonathan and how natural they are and stuff. But my reading of it, and I think this is something I feel about her and Steve in general, is regardless of what you think about either one, and yeah, again, I agree with you. I like Steve as well. I come to like him certainly, but I think the whole deal is that sometimes in life, no matter you could like two people like perfectly fine and not see them as a couple, and I read this scene as showing an example that her and Steve just aren't meant to be together. That then they don't really share that much in common. Now, I think partly through their social circles they've been put together. Obviously, it's like it's sort of highlighted later on. Then obviously Nancy Jonathan comes from different sort of backgrounds. Dibble on if it should be a romance. I think we've both said maybe it would have been best keeping it as a friendship, but I do naturally, I think, like Nancy and Jonathan together more because I think that opposite of the background and stuff, I think it makes it a bit more interesting. And yeah, I just think this scene is meant to show that Steve and Nancy as a couple just don't fit together. Then it's a case of they're two perfectly nice people, but then they're just not on the same page as a couple. You know, because I think when he's doing like the whole Tom Cruise thing, which obviously is entertaining and stuff, but it's almost like, yeah, I think it's meant to be this guy is a bit more of a goofball, and you know that maybe he doesn't understand her as much as he thinks he does. I mean, it's difficult because in that particular scene, obviously, it plays very much as then Nancy has other things on her mind. So, I mean, not necessarily in the scene. It's not necessarily being. It's maybe more about that than she wants to get off and do this thing to try and find Barb, and they're just. But obviously, just circling back around, because one of my things, which I've said in other reviews, is then I just think Nancy is more proactive as a result of her association with Jonathan. Now, obviously, we could potentially, we could potentially see that with Steve, and that could be quite interesting. But yeah, it's almost like I don't think the nature of their relationship allows her to be proactive.
And my counter to that was that, well, Steve is not in this world with her yet. And once he does come into this world, we see that he himself is actually quite proactive. So I think it's more just a case of this is something that she can't quite share with him at this point in time because it is so bizarre. And so the proactiveness comes not from her relationship with Jonathan, but just because she wants to find Barb. And I feel that if Steve had known about the Upside Down from the beginning, that she probably could have still been as proactive with him. I don't think he holds her back from being proactive, but I do kind of understand where you're coming from, but I don't think it's so much about the relationship with Steve rather than it's just about the circumstances and the fact that she's not at a point where she can tell him what is going on. Because how are you supposed to tell your boyfriend, oh yeah, I'm just going to go off and do some monster hunting in this weird upside down world that kind of runs parallel to our world? Like, he probably thinks she was a little nuts. So yeah, so the whole Nancy, Jonathan, Steve thing, we're definitely having some debates about, and like we definitely read a lot of these situations differently, which I think is one of the beauties of the show, the fact that it's got so many layers, we can see it differently.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, obviously, what you're talking about there is you're talking about the storyline reason, though. Whereas I'm talking maybe a bit more thematically, or just saying, then maybe as a coming of age show, maybe it's making the point. Then sometimes, you're with someone at a certain point in your life, you obviously have certain experiences. And again, it's not a knock on Steve, because as he goes on his arc and that, he's obviously revealed to be a really likable, decent guy. But it just maybe happens then you like Nancy, you like Steve individually, but they just don't work together as a couple.
How, for me, Steve and Nancy feel more organic than Nancy and Jonathan, which I know is an unpopular opinion in the Stranger Things fandom in general. But I don't know. For me, I saw that she genuinely liked Steve and she'd been dating him for a while. And they obviously knew each other. He knows that she likes Tom Cruise. And, I feel like there was more of a build up for Steve and Nancy, whereas Nancy and Jonathan, it's like, oh, we have shared trauma. That's it. And for me, that was like really it. That was the only thing that seemed to bond them, was we both after the same monster.
Similar family issues, don't they, with like their sort of parents? Because there's a point made in extremes, maybe, because obviously Jonathan's father is just a piece of shit. But it's
we
more,
had a whole thing about that.
Yeah, it's more with Nancy's father. He's more just of a clueless sort of dork, isn't he? And he's not the greatest father, but obviously it's not to the same extreme as, Jonathan. But they do share that. The other thing, actually, just on something you said, because you said about obviously Nancy has this motivation because of Barb and that. I will just say, I think part of the thing with Steve is then he has made it a bit harder for Nancy to open up to him on that front, because he hasn't taken it so seriously, the stuff with Barb. He hasn't like rallied around, and I think that's,
I understand that.
Yeah.
But the thing in the garage, he seems to be offering her the opportunity to speak. He apologizes and he says, "How's Barb?" And like, I just think, like, and I think I said this in our original recording, like, Nancy, like, let's say Barb had never gone missing. Nancy never would have connected with Jonathan. The only reason they connect is because Barb went missing. If Barb never went missing, she probably just would have kept going on with her life, dating Steve and getting closer to Steve. So it's like, again, that's why I feel that with Nancy and Jonathan, the only thing that is bringing them together is the fact that they have this shared trauma. And I'm supposed to buy that they're, romantically connected. I do like the scenes where they're monster fighting together. As we spoke about in our original in the original recording, we said the ending of this episode is really good because we see Nancy and Jonathan go into the woods and Nancy gets sucked into the upside down. I think those scenes are really good, but I don't like that the show wants me to now believe that these two are romantically involved just because they have this shared experience.
Okay. Before we move on, I'll ask you a question on that front. And I'll say, as we said originally, we'll keep a track of this as we move on, because probably there'll be more talking points and there'll be more than you can say. But you obviously said you don't feel Jonathan and Nancy have a lot in common, based on what we see in the show. Maybe more as friends, not so much, lovers. But do we really see then her and Steve have much in common? I'm not sure we do.
That's true, but it's not so much that they don't have anything in common, more that they haven't really built the relationship on anything. Like, the impression I get, and I could be wrong, but the impression I get is that Steve and Nancy have been dating for a little while. So they've been dating, they've been getting to know each other. So even though we don't see it, they've obviously gotten close. Whereas Jonathan and Nancy don't really, like, their brothers have been friends for years and they barely know each other, so we already know that they're not close. They haven't been close before. So it feels like really the only thing that is bringing them together is this trauma, rather than genuine interest, rather than them going, hey, I like you, let's date, let's get to know each other, which she has obviously done with Steve. So that's kind of more where I'm coming from. Not so much that they don't have anything in common, more that with Steve, we seem to have a build up to the relationship. Whereas with Jonathan, it's like, oh, we have trauma, we must be in love, kind of thing. Like, that's obviously putting it a bit extreme, but it's more like, do you get where I'm coming from? It's more kind of like that sort of thing that bugs me, rather than, oh, we don't have anything in common. It's like, we see the trajectory of her and Steve's relationship, whereas she and Jonathan is like, we just threw them in the romantic deep end because they have this link together. And I feel like they maybe could have worked that out in season 2, but that's a whole other story that we'll get to when we get to season 2. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
To be continued, definitely.
To be continued.
You can obviously offer your thoughts in the comments, what you think, which side of the fence you are, and how
Team Rachel.
How do you Team Rachel or Team Keith, as we said, and what side? How do you read that scene, so to speak? But yeah, I think in a way, they have more chemistry, the actors, like Jonathan and Nancy, and that might be because they got together in real life, sort of thing. But it's obviously debatable which, where she fits more. Maybe she just fits on her own, but
Yes, that's true. She could just be by herself, just be badass and single. And so the final part of this episode is obviously Joyce. Now, we actually started the last review with this bit, but we have Lonnie, deadbeat Lonnie, who's decided to turn up, and you think that maybe he's here for his kid's funeral. He instantly comes in and starts ragging on Jonathan, and just being completely clueless. Keith mentioned a scene that he really loved,
the poster,
where the poster, yes, he like tells him to take down the Evil Dead poster because it's inappropriate. It's like, come on, Lonnie, you know what's inappropriate? Walking out on your wife and kids, that's inappropriate. And then then you find out that no, he hasn't come here for his kid's funeral. He's come here to sue someone and get some money off his kid's death. And you really get to see Joyce be very strong here and tell him off, because he starts being all bullshitty and being like, oh, it can be for Jonathan's college. And she's like, do you even know where he wants to go to college, Lonnie? Like, come on. And, she points out that he's been wanting to go to NYU since he was 6. And you really get to see how much Joyce loves her kids. And she throws Lonnie out, and it's a fantastic character moment for her. And I mentioned in our original recording, later on, Hopper comes to see her, and she goes to answer the door with a hammer because she thinks it's Lonnie. And I'm like, yeah, she's going to smack him in the face. She's so good. And of course, Hopper this episode is it went to Hawkins' lab. Keith called him Renegade Hopper. Renegade Hocker?
Hopper.
Hopper, and he's doing all of his investigation, and we really love that, and they trank him and put him back in his apartment, and he tears the place apart looking for bugs. And he ends up going to Joyce and telling her that she's right. Now, I meant to mention in the previous one, and we can mention it now, there's a beautiful little character moment for Hopper where he calls his ex-wife. And it's almost like he's calling her to say goodbye or something like that, because he's about to go and embark on something dangerous. But it's like a really sweet character moment where he calls his ex-wife and she asks, have you been drinking? And then you hear like her newborn baby crying. So you can tell that she's gotten remarried. And I think he says something like, I don't regret those 7 years. They were the best years of my life. And so we get a bit more insight into Hopper's background and showing how he's still recovering from his daughter's death, and he's still recovering from his divorce with his ex. And I really liked that scene. And then it ends with him and Joyce going to see Terry Ives, and we get a little bit more of the conspiracy because, Hopper was researching Hawkins' lab and the MTSK and all of that. And so we get some really good conspiracy theory stuff and few more building blocks. So again, just another really solid episode. We were saying before how we don't really think we've come across a bad episode in this season so far. It's all just been really great. Feels almost like an 8-hour movie as opposed to, a television series.
Yeah, and I obviously said before how they've paced it nicely, where it's almost like every other episode you get a bridge episode, which is a slightly more. It's a little bit more of a filler, but it's obviously doing important character stuff, and it's setting stuff up for a bigger dramatic episode next time. So that's actually quite a good way to pace out the season. It sort of makes it feel like there's no actual filler episodes, and every episode is important in some ways. It's just some you get the bigger drama a bit more than in others. So it's really good stuff. And again, as we were saying, it ends on a really good cliffhanger with the stuff with Nancy and being dragged into the Upside Down through obviously the bottom part of that tree, Jonathan frantically shouting for her. So it's another really great ending to that chapter, if you like. So they have it. Okay, so you still got 23 minutes out of us. Not bad for
it's not too bad.
A recap, a rehash of what we said. So that's obviously our thoughts on Stranger Things episode 5 of the season. So we're obviously going to continue, as I said, in a weird sort of time travel style thing. We've already done episode 6. So you're in for a treat, and I can confirm it went pretty well, so you've got that to look forward to after this. So we're obviously ramping up to the end of the season now, so let us know your thoughts. And again, Rachel, if you want to promote your channel before we go.
Guys, you can follow me, Rachel McDonald, video essays on TV shows and movies. I don't post that regularly at the moment, but I will be soon. So in the next few months, hopefully I will start putting up more regular videos. My Tumblr and my Twitter accounts are also on my YouTube, so follow me everywhere. And Keith usually puts a link in the description so you can find me easily, and come follow me everywhere.
Okay, thanks guys. Keep watching Stranger Things. We'll be back with more soon. See you later. Goodbye.